December 4th, 1872. Mid-Atlantic. A British brigantine spots a vessel drifting aimlessly through the waves. No distress signals. No signs of damage. No response to hails. The boarding party climbs aboard and finds a ghost ship. The cargo is intact. Valuables remain untouched. 6 months of food and water sits in storage. The captain's log lies open on his desk. The last entry dated 9 days earlier. But the crew, all 10 people who sailed aboard the Mary Celeste, are gone. No bodies, no blood, no signs of struggle. Just an eerie absence where 10 lives should be. The ship's wheel turns lazily in the wind. The sails hang loose, and carved into maritime history is one of the most analyzed, debated, and inexplicable mysteries ever recorded. A mystery that has spawned thousands of theories, but has never been definitively solved. Tonight, on the Obscure Hour, we're boarding the Mary Celeste, examining every detail of what was found and what was missing, exploring what could make an experienced captain abandon a seaworthy ship with his wife, his 2-year-old daughter, and 7 crew members. This is the story of the ghost ship that sailed itself across the Atlantic with no one at the helm. You've just entered the Obscure Hour. Brace yourself for what's ahead, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a mystery. What happened? November 7th, 1872. The merchant brigantine Mary Celeste departed New York Harbor, bound for Genoa, Italy. She carried 1,701 barrels of commercial alcohol, a valuable cargo worth approximately $35,000 at the time. At the helm was Captain Benjamin Spooner Briggs, age 37, an experienced and respected master mariner. This wasn't supposed to be a mysterious voyage. It was a routine commercial run. Briggs had made similar journeys many times. He'd brought his wife, Sarah, and their 2-year-old daughter, Sophia, with him, something he'd done on previous voyages. The crew of 7 were all experienced sailors, with good records. Everything about the Mary Celeste's departure was normal. She was seaworthy, well supplied, properly crewed. The weather was clear. There were no indications of trouble. On December 4th, 1872, the British brigantine Dei Gratia was sailing the same Atlantic route, about 400 miles east of the Azores. First mate Oliver Deveau spotted a vessel in the distance. Something about it seemed wrong. It was sailing erratically, moving with the wind, but with no apparent control or purpose. Captain David Morehouse of the Dei Gratia observed the ship through his glass. He recognized it. It was the Mary Celeste. Morehouse knew Captain Briggs personally. They dined together before both ships left New York. Morehouse's ship departing 8 days after Briggs. But why was the Mary Celeste sailing like that? Why wasn't she responding to signals? Morehouse dispatched a boarding party. Second mate John Wright and first mate Oliver Deveau rowed across with a small crew. They climbed aboard the Mary Celeste. The ship was deserted. not abandoned in chaos, not ravaged by disaster, just empty. DeVoe would later testify in meticulous detail about what he found. The ship had taken on some water in the hold, about 3.5 feet, but this was not dangerous for a vessel of her size. The pumps were working. The hull was sound. There was no structural damage that would explain abandoning ship. One lifeboat was missing, apparently launched or cut away deliberately. The ship's compass was destroyed. The binnacle, the housing that holds the compass, was displaced. Some navigation equipment was missing. In the captain's cabin, the logbook lay on the desk. The last entry was dated November 25th, 9 days before the Mary Celeste was found. It recorded the ship's position off the island of Santa Maria in the Azores. Nothing in the entry suggested distress or trouble, just routine navigation notes. The crew's personal belongings were still in their quarters. Clothes hung on hooks. Boots sat by bunks. A bottle of cough medicine stood on a shelf, still full. In the galley, pots and pans were neatly stored. There was food in the stores, plenty of it. Fresh water in the casks, 6 months' worth. But here's what made investigators pause. In the captain's cabin, a half-eaten breakfast sat on the table. Some sources say it was breakfast. Others say it might have been another meal. The details have been debated and possibly embellished over time. But the core fact remains. There was evidence of a meal recently prepared or consumed. A child's toys were scattered in the cabin. Sophia Briggs's things. The bed was unmade. A sewing machine sat in the corner, with Sarah Briggs's sewing lying beside it, as if she'd just put it down. The cargo was intact, 1,701 barrels, though 9 were found empty later, likely leaked during the voyage. The alcohol was commercial grade, not suitable for drinking, but valuable nonetheless. Nothing had been stolen. The ship's manifest showed everything accounted for. Personal valuables remained undisturbed. Captain Briggs's navigation instruments, valuable tools of his trade, were still in his cabin. Money was found in a drawer. The crew's wages, due to be paid, sat in the ship's safe. Whatever happened aboard the Mary Celeste, it wasn't piracy. It wasn't theft. It wasn't a typical maritime disaster. The most telling detail was this. The ship's register and navigation documents were missing. Captains took these documents with them if they abandoned ship because they'd need them to prove their identity and claim salvage rights later. The fact that these documents were gone suggested a deliberate, conscious abandoning of the vessel. But why? The Mary Celeste was sailed to Gibraltar by a prize crew from the Dei Grazia. Maritime law at the time provided for salvage rights. If you rescued an abandoned ship, you could claim a portion of its value. This created immediate suspicion. Had Morehouse and his crew somehow caused the Mary Celeste to be abandoned so they could claim salvage? The Admiralty Court in Gibraltar conducted a thorough investigation. The court heard testimony from everyone involved. They examined the ship from stem to stern. They looked for evidence of foul play, mutiny, piracy, fraud, or any explanation that would make sense of the ghost ship. They found nothing conclusive. The court awarded salvage rights to the De Gracia crew, though the amount was much less than typical, suggesting the court had suspicions, but no proof of wrongdoing. The Mary Celeste was returned to her owners and eventually sold. She would sail again under different owners, but she'd never shake the reputation of being cursed, haunted, a ship of doom. Benjamin Briggs, Sarah Briggs, 2-year-old Sophia, and the 7 crew members were never seen again. No bodies were ever recovered. No wreckage from the missing lifeboat was ever found. No one ever came forward claiming to know what happened. 10 people vanished from a perfectly seaworthy ship in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, leaving behind all their possessions, all their supplies, all the valuable cargo. They climbed into a small lifeboat designed for emergencies, not long-distance travel, and sailed off into mystery. The Mary Celeste became legendary. Writers embellished the story, adding details that weren't true. Arthur Conan Doyle wrote a fictionalized account that introduced elements that have become part of the myth. Meals still warm on the table, coffee still hot, pipes still smoking. None of these theatrical details were in the actual evidence, but they became part of the popular story. The real mystery is strange enough without embellishment. A ship sailing itself across the Atlantic with no one aboard. 10 people who made the decision to abandon a safe vessel for the uncertain fate of a small lifeboat on the open ocean. A decision that, based on every piece of evidence we have, makes no logical sense. What could possibly make an experienced captain like Benjamin Briggs order everyone into the lifeboat and leave behind everything they owned and everything they needed to survive? That's the question that has haunted maritime historians for 152 years. Documented details. Let's examine what we actually know, detail by detail, separating fact from the fiction that has accumulated around this case over more than a century. The ship, the Mary Celeste, was a brigantine, a 2-masted sailing vessel. She was 103 feet long, with a 282-ton displacement. Built in 1861 in Nova Scotia under the name Amazon, she had a troubled early history with accidents and mishaps that gave her a reputation as an unlucky ship even before the famous incident. She was purchased and renamed Mary Celeste in 1868. By 1872, she was owned by a consortium that included Captain Benjamin Briggs, who owned a 1/3 share. This is important. Briggs wasn't just the captain. He was part owner. He had a financial stake in the ship and its cargo. The idea that he would abandon or sabotage his own investment makes little sense. The Mary Celeste was considered a sound vessel by 1872. She'd been refitted and was in good condition. Her reputation as unlucky was known, but Briggs, a rational and experienced mariner, didn't appear to be superstitious about it. The captain and his family, Benjamin Spooner Briggs, was 37 years old and came from a seafaring family. His father was a sea captain. His brothers were sea captains. He'd been sailing since childhood and had commanded vessels for years. He was known as competent, careful, and deeply religious. He was a member of the temperance movement and didn't drink alcohol. His wife, Sarah Elizabeth Briggs, was 30 years old. She was educated and came from a respectable family. She'd sailed with her husband before and was comfortable at sea. Contemporary accounts describe her as intelligent and capable. Their daughter, Sophia Matilda Briggs, was 2 years old. The couple had another son, Arthur, age 7, who they'd left behind with family in Massachusetts. Why take Sophia but not Arthur? Possibly because Arthur was in school, or because a 2-year-old was easier to manage aboard ship than a 7-year-old boy. The fact that Briggs brought his wife and young daughter on this voyage has been interpreted different ways. Some see it as evidence that he expected a routine, safe journey. Others note that it might have affected his decision-making if crisis arose. A captain with his family aboard might make different choices than one traveling alone with only crew. The crew, the 7 crew members, were all experienced sailors. Albert Richardson, age 28, first mate, American, experienced and capable. Andrew Gilling, age 25, second mate, Danish, good record. Edward William Head, age 23, steward and cook, American. Volkert Lorenzen, age 29, able seaman, German. Arian Martins, age 35, able seaman, German. Boy Lorenzen, age 23, able seaman, German. Yes, his first name was Boy. Gottlieb Gondeschall, age 23, able seaman, German. 4 Germans, 1 Dane, 3 Americans, including the captain. A typical international crew for a merchant vessel of that era. No known conflicts among them. No history of misconduct or violence. By all accounts, a solid, professional crew. The cargo, 1,701 barrels of denatured alcohol, also called commercial alcohol. This wasn't drinking alcohol. It was industrial-grade ethanol, intended for fortifying wine in Italy. It had additives that made it poisonous to drink. The cargo was worth approximately $35,000, a substantial sum in 1872. The barrels were wooden, sealed, and stacked in the hold. 9 barrels were later found to be empty or leaking, which becomes important when we discuss theories. The cargo was properly loaded and secured, The manifest was complete and accurate. There was no indication of anything wrong with the cargo before departure. The voyage, November 7th, 1872. The Mary Celeste departs New York Harbor. Weather is clear. The ship is fully supplied for the journey to Genoa, estimated to take about 4 to 6 weeks, depending on conditions. November 7th to November 24th. We have no direct information about this period. The ship was sailing the Atlantic, presumably making good progress. Later analysis of the logbook suggests nothing unusual happened during this time. November 25th, 1872. The last logbook entry. Captain Briggs records the ship's position as off the island of Santa Maria in the Azores, at approximately 36.56 degrees north, 27.20 west. The entry notes that they'd sighted Santa Maria. It's a routine navigation note with no indication of trouble. The handwriting is normal, steady, not rushed or distressed. December 4th, 1872. The Dei Gratia spots the Mary Celeste about 400 miles east of the Azores, drifting. The ship's position was roughly 38.20 degrees north, 17.15 degrees west, which means she'd sailed about 500 to 600 miles from her last recorded position, though not in a straight line. What was found aboard? The boarding party's observations were recorded in testimony before the Admiralty Court. Here's what they documented. The deck. One hatch was open. The pumps had been used recently, but were not currently operating. Some rigging was damaged, though this could have occurred during the days the ship sailed unmanned. The ship's compass was destroyed or removed from its mounting. The binnacle was knocked out of place. The hold. About 3.5 feet of water. This sounds like a lot, but the Mary Celeste could handle much more before being in danger. The water was sloshing around, which could have alarmed the crew if they weren't familiar with the ship's capacity. But it wasn't actually dangerous. The lifeboat, the ship's yawl, a small boat used for emergencies, was missing. The davits, the mechanism for launching the boat, showed that the boat had been launched or deliberately removed, not torn away by waves. A section of railing was also removed or broken where the boat would have been lowered. The captain's cabin. The logbook was open to the last entry. The ship's register and navigation documents were missing. Personal belongings were present. The bed was unmade. Sophia's toys were there. Some sources mention a sword found under the bed, which was examined for bloodstains and found clean, though this detail has been disputed. The crew quarters. Personal effects remained. Clothing, boots, and personal items. Everything suggested the crew had not packed or taken their belongings. If the abandonment was planned, they didn't prepare for it. The galley. Pots and pans present. Food in storage. Water supply intact. Some reports mention evidence of a recent meal, though exactly what was found varies by source. The stove was not currently in use. The cargo hold. The barrels were examined. Most were intact and sealed. 9 were found empty or partially empty. There was a smell of alcohol in the hold, suggesting some leakage or venting had occurred. What was missing? The ship's yawl, lifeboat, the navigation documents, the ship's chronometer, a precise clock used for navigation, the sextant. Though this is disputed, some sources say it was found aboard. The pump valve, a small piece of equipment used to measure water depth in the hold. Notably missing, any indication of why they left. No note, no message, no log entry explaining a decision to abandon ship. The condition of the ship. The Dei Gratia crew sailed the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar, a journey of several days. This proved the ship was seaworthy. She handled normally. She wasn't taking on excessive water. Her hull was sound. Her rigging, though somewhat damaged from sailing unmanned, was functional. There was no structural damage that would justify abandoning the vessel. No holes in the hull, no major leaks, no fire damage, no signs of collision or grounding. The ship was in better condition than many vessels that successfully completed Atlantic crossings. This is the central puzzle. Why would 10 people abandon a perfectly seaworthy ship? The court. Investigation. The Vice Admiralty Court in Gibraltar began proceedings in December 1872. The hearings lasted 3 months. Every aspect of the Mary Celeste was examined. The Attorney General, Frederick Solly Flood, was suspicious from the start. He believed something criminal had occurred. Flood's theory was that the crew had broken into the alcohol cargo, gotten drunk, murdered Captain Briggs and his family, and then fled in the lifeboat. He looked for evidence of violence. He examined a sword found in the captain's cabin and initially believed the stains on it were blood. Analysis proved they were rust. He found cuts on the ship's railings that he thought might be sword marks from a fight. Marine surveyors testified they were normal wear and tear from ropes and equipment. He investigated whether the Dei Gratia crew might have been involved in a conspiracy with the Mary Celeste crew to stage an abandonment and collect salvage money. The timeline didn't support this. The Dei Gratia had left New York 8 days after the Mary Celeste, and there was no evidence the crews knew each other beyond the 2 captains being acquaintances. After 3 months, the court found no evidence of criminal activity. They awarded salvage rights to the Dei Gratia crew, though the amount was only about 1/5 of the ship's value, lower than typical salvage awards. This suggested lingering suspicions, but no proof. The court's official conclusion was no conclusion. They couldn't determine what happened. The case was closed without resolution. The aftermath. The Mary Celeste was returned to her owners and continued sailing under various owners for 12 more years. She was considered unlucky. Sailors were reluctant to crew her. She changed hands 17 times in those 12 years, an unusually high number, suggesting no one wanted to keep her long. In 1885, the Mary Celeste was deliberately run aground off the coast of Haiti in an attempt at insurance fraud by her then owner. The scheme was discovered and prosecuted. The ship broke apart on the reef where she'd been grounded. Her timbers still lie there today. Benjamin Briggs' family never accepted that he was lost at sea. His mother waited years, hoping for word. His son Arthur grew up never knowing what happened to his father, mother, and little sister. The family received no insurance payout because there was no proof of death. The crew members' families were similarly left without closure or compensation. Early theories and speculation. Almost immediately, speculation began about what happened. In the absence of facts, people filled the void with theories. Some said the ship was cursed. The troubled history of the Amazon before she was renamed contributed to this. Supernatural explanations were popular in the 1870s. Others suggested piracy, though the intact cargo and valuables made this unlikely. If pirates had attacked, why leave everything valuable behind? Mutiny was proposed. But if the crew had mutinied and killed the captain, why abandon the ship? Why not sail it to port and claim it as salvage or sell the cargo? In 1884, Arthur Conan Doyle published a fictionalized account called J. Habakkuk Jepson's Statement in the Cornhill magazine. Doyle added numerous fictional elements. Meals still warm. A ship in perfect order. Mysterious survivors. His account wasn't labeled as fiction clearly enough, and many people believed it was factual reporting. This contaminated public understanding of the case for generations. Throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s, the story of the Mary Celeste was embellished with each retelling. The legend grew more dramatic than the reality. The ghost ship became a symbol of maritime mystery, referenced in literature, art, and popular culture. What we know with certainty, stripping away speculation and fiction, here's what we can say definitively. The Mary Celeste departed New York on November 7th, 1872, with 10 people aboard and 1,701 barrels of commercial alcohol. The last log entry was on November 25th, off the Azores. The ship was found abandoned on December 4th, having drifted about 500 to 600 miles from its last known position. All 10 people were missing, along with the ship's lifeboat and navigation documents. The ship was seaworthy and well supplied. No evidence of violence, piracy, or struggle was found. The cargo was intact. Valuables were not stolen. No bodies or wreckage from the lifeboat were ever discovered. Everything else is theory, speculation, or deliberate fiction. Theories. Over 150 years, countless explanations have been proposed for the Mary Celeste mystery. Let's examine the most credible theories, what evidence supports them, and what problems they face. Theory 1. Alcohol vapor explosion scare. This is currently the most widely accepted theory among maritime historians and is supported by modern scientific analysis. The theory proposes that the cargo of commercial alcohol created a dangerous situation through vapor buildup. 9 of the barrels were found empty or leaking, Denatured alcohol evaporates quickly, producing flammable vapors. In the enclosed cargo hold, these vapors could accumulate. Here's the scenario. On November 25th, or shortly after, the crew noticed a smell of alcohol. This would be alarming because alcohol vapors are explosive. If ignited, they could blow the ship apart. Captain Briggs might have ordered the main cargo hatch opened to ventilate the hold. When the hatch was opened, there could have been a minor explosion or a loud whump sound as vapor ignited or vented explosively, but without causing a sustained fire. This would produce smoke or vapor that looked like the ship was about to explode. Faced with what appeared to be an imminent catastrophic explosion, Briggs made a split-second decision. Get everyone into the lifeboat immediately and move away from the ship until the situation stabilized. They might have attached a rope from the lifeboat to the Mary Celeste, planning to return once they were sure there was no danger. Then something went wrong. The rope broke or was never properly secured. The Mary Celeste drifted away faster than expected. The small yawl, with 10 people aboard, was now adrift in the Atlantic. They tried to row back to the ship or to reach land, but failed. Everyone perished at sea. Evidence supporting this theory. In 1885, an engineer named Dr. Andrea Mohorovicic created a scale model of the Mary Celeste's cargo hold and conducted experiments with alcohol vapor. He demonstrated that vapor could accumulate and cause a minor explosion that produced smoke and noise without actually damaging the ship or causing sustained fire. This would explain why the ship showed no fire damage, but why the crew might have believed explosion was imminent. The 9 empty barrels suggest leakage. The smell of alcohol reported by the boarding party indicates vapor was present. The open hatch is consistent with attempting to ventilate. The missing lifeboat and people are consistent with temporary evacuation. Modern understanding of alcohol vapor behavior supports the possibility of this scenario. Commercial alcohol of that era was stored in wooden barrels that could leak. In November Atlantic conditions, temperature changes could cause pressure changes that led to leaking or venting. Problems with this theory. Would an experienced captain like Briggs really abandon ship over vapor without actually seeing fire or explosion? Seems like an overreaction. The theory requires that the rope connecting the lifeboat to the ship broke or failed, but there's no direct evidence of this. We have to assume it rather than prove it. If this happened shortly after the last log entry on November 25th, the ship drifted for 9 days before being found. What was the weather like during those 9 days? If seas were rough, could the Mary Celeste have survived unmanned? And if seas were calm, how did the lifeboat fail to return to the ship or reach land? The timing is tight. The Azores were visible on November 25th. The nearest islands were only about 60 miles away. A lifeboat could theoretically reach land in good conditions. Why didn't they make it? Theory 2. Waterspout, or seaquake. This theory proposes that a natural phenomenon created a situation that convinced the crew they needed to evacuate. A waterspout is a tornado over water. They occur in the Atlantic and can be terrifying to witness. A large waterspout approaching could have made the crew fear the ship would be destroyed. They might have evacuated preemptively. Or perhaps a seaquake, an underwater earthquake, occurred. Seaquakes can create unusual wave patterns and sounds. Ships have reported feeling impacts or shuddering during seaquakes. If the crew felt a massive underwater impact, They might have thought the ship had struck a reef or was breaking apart, even though she actually hadn't. In panic, believing the ship was doomed, they evacuated. Once in the lifeboat, they realized their mistake, but couldn't get back to the ship. Evidence supporting this theory. The Azores region does experience seismic activity. Earthquakes and seaquakes are not uncommon there. The destroyed compass and displaced binnacle could be evidence of a violent shaking event. A waterspout would explain sudden panic and the decision to evacuate quickly. Waterspouts can appear with little warning and look apocalyptic to those who haven't seen them before. Problems with this theory. If a waterspout had struck or nearly struck the Mary Celeste, there should be more damage to the rigging and deck. Waterspouts create extreme winds. The ship would show more signs of impact. If a seaquake occurred, it would have affected the area. But there are no reports from other ships in the region at that time of unusual phenomena. The Dei Gratia, sailing a similar route, reported normal conditions. This theory also requires the same assumption as the alcohol theory. Something prevented them from returning to the ship or reaching land after evacuation. Theory 3. Contaminated food or water. This theory suggests that food poisoning or contaminated water caused illness that led to irrational decision-making. If the crew became sick from bad food or water, they might have experienced symptoms like hallucinations, confusion, or delirium. In such a state, Captain Briggs might have made the irrational decision to abandon ship. Ergot poisoning from contaminated grain has been proposed specifically. Ergot is a fungus that grows on grain and can cause hallucinations, convulsions, and psychosis when consumed. Ergot poisoning, also called St. Anthony's fire, was not uncommon in the 19th century. Evidence supporting this theory. Ergot poisoning is a documented phenomenon and has caused documented cases of mass hysteria. The psychological effects could explain irrational behavior. If multiple people were affected, it could explain a group decision to do something that makes no sense. Problems with this theory. The boarding party found food supplies intact and apparently edible. If the food was contaminated, this poisoning may have been dead wrong. The Dei Gratia crew, who salvaged the ship, should have been at risk too. There's no evidence they encountered problems. Ergot poisoning symptoms would make it difficult to function. Could 10 sick, hallucinating people successfully launch a lifeboat and sail away? Seems unlikely. Also, this theory doesn't explain why they took the navigation documents. If they were delirious, would they remember to take those specific items? Theory 4. Conspiracy between the two ships. This was the theory Frederick Sully Flood initially investigated. He suspected that Captain Morehouse of the Dei Gratia and Captain Briggs of the Mary Celeste had conspired to stage an abandonment so Morehouse could claim salvage rights. The scenario would be Briggs and his crew pretended to abandon the Mary Celeste. They were picked up by the Dei Gratia. Morehouse then discovered the abandoned ship and claimed salvage. They'd split the money afterward. Evidence supporting this theory. The two captains knew each other. They dined together in New York before departure. The timeline works. The Dei Gratia departed 8 days after the Mary Celeste and was roughly on the same route. A conspiracy would explain why valuable cargo was left behind and why no distress or struggle occurred. Problems with this theory. Where did Briggs and his family go? If they were picked up by the Dei Gratia, they would have been seen in Gibraltar. You can't hide 10 people on a ship that's about to be inspected by authorities. The salvage award was much lower than typical. If this was fraud for money, it wasn't successful fraud. They would have received more money if the conspiracy hadn't been suspected. Most importantly, Benjamin Briggs had a 1/3 ownership stake in the Mary Celeste and her cargo. Why would he abandon his own valuable investment for a share of a salvage award that would be far less than what his cargo was worth? The financial incentive doesn't make sense. This theory was thoroughly investigated by the Admiralty Court, and no evidence of conspiracy was found. Modern historians generally dismiss it. Theory 5. Rogue wave or sudden storm. Perhaps a massive wave struck the ship, or a sudden storm created conditions that made the crew believe the ship was sinking or about to be destroyed. A rogue wave could have washed over the deck, causing temporary flooding and creating the impression the ship was going down. In the confusion, Briggs ordered evacuation. Once in the lifeboat, they couldn't get back. Or a sudden violent squall could have created similar panic. If rigging broke and the ship began listing, the crew might have thought she was about to capsize. Evidence supporting this theory. The damage to some of the rigging suggests violent weather at some point. The water in the hold could have come from a wave washing over the deck. Rogue waves are documented phenomena that can appear without warning. Problems with this theory. The Mary Celeste was found in good condition. If a wave large enough to cause panic had struck, there should be more damage. The hold water level wasn't dangerous. An experienced captain would have known this. Also, why take the navigation documents if you're evacuating in panic from a sudden wave? That suggests calculated abandonment, not panicked flight. Theory 6. Faulty pump reading. This is a variation on the vapor explosion theory. The crew used a pump valve to measure water depth in the hold. If the pump valve was faulty, or if someone misread it, they might have believed the ship was taking on water far faster than she actually was. Combine this with the alcohol smell, and perhaps some other concerning factor, and you have a situation where the captain reasonably believed the ship was in danger, even though she wasn't. They evacuate temporarily, planning to return once they assess the situation from a distance. The rope breaks. They drift away. They die at sea. Evidence supporting this theory. The pump valve was missing from the Mary Celeste when found. This suggests it was with the crew in the lifeboat, which makes sense if they evacuated due to concerns about water levels. The theory explains rational decision-making by experienced sailors who nonetheless made a fatal mistake. Problems with this theory. This requires multiple things to go wrong: a faulty reading, a decision to evacuate, and then failure of the rope or inability to return. That's a lot of coincidence. Theory 7. Attack by giant squid or sea creature. I include this only because it's been proposed in popular culture and reflects the enduring power of the mysterious. The theory is that a giant squid or other sea creature attacked the crew when they were on deck, pulling them overboard one by one. The remaining crew fled in the lifeboat, but were also killed. Evidence supporting this theory? None. Giant squid exist and can be dangerous, but there's no evidence one attacked the Mary Celeste. Why this theory persists? Because it's dramatic and fits the ghost ship narrative. It's been featured in fiction and film, but serious historians don't give it credence. Problems with this theory. Everything. There's no evidence of struggle on deck. No blood. No damage consistent with an attack by a large creature. If a squid pulled people off the ship, others would have had time to run inside and lock the hatches. The idea that a creature eliminated 10 people without leaving any trace is not plausible. Why people talk about it? The Mary Celeste has captivated imaginations for over 150 years. It's been the subject of books, films, documentaries, songs, and endless speculation. But why has this particular maritime mystery endured when thousands of other ships have been lost with their crews? The abandoned scene. There's something uniquely unsettling about an abandoned place that was recently occupied. We see evidence of human presence, the personal items, the half-eaten meal, the child's toys, but the people are gone. It creates a sense of frozen time, life interrupted, presence becoming absence. This taps into something primal in human psychology. We're social creatures. We expect to find people where there are signs of people. When those people are missing, it creates cognitive dissonance that we can't easily resolve. The Mary Celeste gives us this feeling amplified. Not just an abandoned house, but an abandoned ship in the middle of the ocean. Not just missing people, but missing people who had nowhere to go. The isolation makes the absence more profound. The rational mystery. Unlike supernatural mysteries or cases involving clearly irrational behavior, the Mary Celeste presents as a rational puzzle that should be solvable. We have physical evidence. We have testimony from witnesses. We have a clear timeline. We have documentation. All the pieces are there. We should be able to figure out what happened. And yet we can't. Not with certainty. This is psychologically fascinating. We're used to mysteries being mysterious because we lack information. The Mary Celeste is mysterious despite having information. The facts don't add up to a clear answer. This challenges our belief that rational analysis can solve any problem. It suggests that even with evidence, even with logic, some things remain unknowable. That's both frustrating and compelling. It's a puzzle we keep trying to solve, even though 150 years of effort haven't produced a definitive solution. The family element. This wasn't just a crew of sailors. This was a captain, his wife, and his 2-year-old daughter. The presence of Sarah and Sophia Briggs makes the story more emotionally resonant. We imagine a mother and child aboard that ship. We think about what their final moments might have been like. We wonder if they were afraid. There's also the son left behind, Arthur, who lost his entire family in one inexplicable event. He grew up never knowing what happened to them. That human dimension makes the mystery more than just a maritime puzzle. It's a family tragedy. The fact that Benjamin Briggs chose to bring his family on what should have been a routine voyage makes his decision to abandon ship even more puzzling. Would a man with his wife and small daughter aboard really evacuate into a small lifeboat over a vapor smell or water in the hold? Wouldn't the presence of his family make him more cautious, not less? The perfect storm of strangeness. The Mary Celeste hits multiple notes that make mysteries compelling. It's a disappearance with no bodies. It involves the sea, which humans have always found mysterious and threatening. It has that ghost ship quality that fires the imagination. It involves experienced professionals who should have known better. It has details that seem like clues, but don't lead to answers. It happened long enough ago to be historical, but recently enough to have good documentation. All of these elements combine to create the perfect mystery. Not too ancient to be mythological, not too recent to be mundane. Complex enough to be interesting, simple enough to be followable. The contamination by fiction. Ironically, part of why the Mary Celeste remains famous is because the story has been so thoroughly fictionalized. Arthur Conan Doyle's 1884 story added dramatic elements that weren't real. Later writers added even more. By the mid-20th century, the popular version of the Mary Celeste included all sorts of details that never happened. Meals still warm, coffee still hot, pipes still smoking, cats still alive aboard. These fictional elements made the story more dramatic and more widely known. But they also made the real mystery harder to solve because fact and fiction became entangled in public consciousness. People still reference the warm meal detail, even though it's not supported by actual evidence. The story took on a life of its own, beyond the historical event. This contamination of fact by fiction is itself fascinating. It shows how stories evolve in popular culture. The Mary Celeste became a legend, more than a historical event. The democratic mystery. Anyone can have a theory about the Mary Celeste. You don't need specialized knowledge. You don't need access to classified information. The facts are available. The evidence is documented. Anyone can examine it and propose an explanation. This makes it a participatory mystery. People feel ownership over it. They can engage with it directly, form their own opinions, debate with others. It's not locked away in government files or lost to history. Maritime historians, scientists, amateur detectives, casual readers, everyone can contribute to the conversation. This keeps the mystery alive. Each generation discovers it anew and brings fresh perspectives. The unsinkable story. The Mary Celeste herself had a strange afterlife. She continued sailing for 12 years after the incident, changing hands repeatedly. Considered unlucky, eventually deliberately run aground in an insurance fraud scheme. There's almost a narrative symmetry there. The ship became as cursed in life as the story became immortal in retelling. The physical vessel ended ignominiously, but the mystery became legendary. This transformation of a historical event into cultural mythology is part of what makes it endure. The Mary Celeste isn't just a ship anymore. It's a symbol of maritime mystery, of unsolved puzzles, of the unknowable. Most unsettling aspects. Let's focus on the specific elements that make the Mary Celeste particularly disturbing. The details that resist explanation even when we try to rationalize them. The child, Sophia Briggs, was 2 years old, too young to understand what was happening, entirely dependent on her parents. Whatever occurred aboard the Mary Celeste, it happened to a toddler who couldn't possibly have done anything to cause it or prevent it. She was just there, caught up in events beyond anyone's control. When we think about the adults, we can imagine them making decisions, reacting to crisis, attempting to survive. But a 2-year-old? She would have been carried into that lifeboat. She would have been cold, probably afraid, certainly confused. If the lifeboat drifted for days before everyone died, what were those final days like for Sophia? This is the thought that haunts people who delve deep into this case. The child who had no choice in any of it. The navigation documents. The fact that someone took the ship's register and navigation documents suggests calculated thinking. This wasn't pure panic. Someone had the presence of mind to grab specific papers. Captains took these documents when abandoning ship because they'd need them to prove their identity and claim the vessel later. The missing documents suggest Captain Briggs believed they were temporarily leaving, not permanently abandoning. But then why not take other valuable things? Why not take money, or extra clothing, or more supplies? The selectivity is strange. It suggests a specific scenario. Briggs thought they'd be away from the ship briefly, close enough to return or be rescued quickly. He took only what was legally necessary. He didn't pack for survival. This makes the fatal outcome even more tragic. They thought it was temporary. They thought they'd be safe. They were wrong. The seaworthy ship, the Mary Celeste, sailed herself across hundreds of miles of ocean, with no one at the helm. When found, she was in good enough condition to be sailed to Gibraltar. This means whatever made them abandon ship wasn't real, or at least wasn't as dangerous as they believed. They fled a safe vessel for the uncertainty of a small lifeboat in the Atlantic. They traded safety for danger, and they did so based on false information or misjudgment. The ship that could have saved them sailed away while they drifted to their deaths. That reversal is deeply unsettling. The thing they fled from was their best chance of survival. The complete disappearance. Not one body was ever found. Not one piece of the lifeboat washed up on any shore. 10 people and their vessel vanished as completely as if they'd never existed. The Atlantic is vast, yes, but over 150 years, you'd expect something to surface. A body washing up somewhere, debris, anything, but there's been nothing. Not one confirmed artifact from the missing lifeboat or its passengers. This absolute absence is statistically unusual. Ships sink all the time. Bodies wash ashore. Wreckage appears. The odds of 10 people and their boat disappearing so completely that nothing is ever found again are very low. It's as if they sailed through a doorway into non-existence. The timing. 9 days passed between the last log entry and the discovery of the abandoned ship. 9 days when the Mary Celeste sailed alone through the Atlantic. During those 9 days, other ships passed nearby. The Dei Grazia was sailing the same route, but no one saw anything suspicious. No lifeboat was spotted. No distress signals were observed. Where was the lifeboat during those 9 days? If they stayed near the ship, why didn't they see other vessels and signal for help? If they sailed toward land, why didn't they make it? The Azores were relatively close. The timeline suggests they died quickly, probably within a day or two of abandoning ship. But how? Exposure? Swamped by a wave? Some other disaster? We'll never know. Those 9 days are a black box. Whatever happened in them is lost to history. What science says. Modern science and maritime expertise have given us tools to analyze the Mary Celeste mystery that weren't available in 1872. What can we say with scientific confidence about what might have happened? Alcohol vapor behavior. Chemical engineers have studied how denatured alcohol behaves in wooden barrels in maritime conditions. The findings support the vapor explosion theory as plausible. Denatured alcohol evaporates readily, especially when temperature changes. November in the Atlantic involves significant day-night temperature swings. During the day, the hold heats up. Pressure builds in the barrels. Seams can leak or bungholes can vent. Alcohol vapor is heavier than air, so it sinks to the lowest parts of the hold. If enough accumulates, You have an explosive atmosphere. All it takes is a spark, static electricity, metal striking metal, even spontaneous combustion in the right conditions. The experiments by Dr. Mohorovichik in 1885 showed that you can get a deflagration, a rapid burning that produces a loud noise and smoke, but doesn't necessarily cause lasting fire or structural damage. To someone aboard ship, this would look and sound like an explosion, but afterward, the ship would show little evidence of it. Modern understanding of vapor-air mixtures confirms this is possible. You can have an event that is terrifying to witness, but doesn't actually damage the vessel significantly. Lifeboat survival rates. Maritime survival experts have analyzed what happens to people in small boats in open ocean. A yawl like the Mary Celeste's could hold 10 people, but it would be crowded and not designed for extended voyages. It would have basic supplies for emergency use, but not enough for days at sea with 10 people, including a 2-year-old. In November Atlantic conditions, exposure would be the primary threat. Even if the weather was relatively calm, nighttime temperatures would drop to near freezing. Wet clothes from spray would lead to hypothermia. Without adequate protection, people can die from exposure in hours, not days. If the seas were even moderately rough, a small boat could be swamped. Once you take on water, the weight makes the boat less stable. A second wave could capsize you. Modern analysis suggests that 10 people in that size boat in November, even relatively close to land, had a very low survival probability. If they were relying on reaching the Azores by rowing or sailing, they'd need perfect conditions and expert seamanship. The presence of a 2-year-old would make survival even less likely. Small children succumb to exposure faster than adults. Navigational analysis. Modern GPS and satellite data have allowed researchers to analyze ocean currents in the region where the Mary Celeste was found. The currents in that area of the Atlantic are complex. Depending on exactly where the lifeboat entered the water, it could have been carried in various directions. Some current patterns would push a small boat away from land. Others might circle it back toward the shipping lanes. This analysis shows that if the lifeboat entered the water near the Mary Celeste's last known position, off Santa Maria, reaching the Azores against currents would be very difficult. They'd be fighting both currents and wind. If they intended to stay near the ship, the differential between the ship's drift and the lifeboat's drift could have separated them quickly. A ship with masts and rigging catches wind differently than a small, low-profile boat. Separation of 100 yards becomes a mile, becomes impossible to reverse without engine power. Psychological factors. Modern understanding of decision-making under stress provides insight into how experienced professionals can make fatal mistakes. The phenomenon called stress-induced cognitive narrowing occurs when people focus intensely on one threat and miss other information. If Captain Briggs was focused on the alcohol vapor risk, he might have underestimated the danger of the lifeboat, or overestimated their ability to return. Group dynamics also play a role. If the captain made a decision to evacuate, the crew would follow. Even if individual crew members had doubts, the hierarchical structure of a ship means the captain's judgment prevails. There's also escalation of commitment, where an initial decision leads to further commitments, even when circumstances change. Once in the lifeboat, pride or stubbornness might have prevented admitting the mistake and trying harder to return to the ship. These aren't supernatural factors. They're well-documented aspects of human. What forensic analysis shows. Modern forensic techniques applied to historical records and remaining physical evidence have revealed some insights. Analysis of the testimony given at Gibraltar shows inconsistencies that suggest some witnesses were either mistaken or embellishing. This doesn't mean fraud, just that human memory is fallible, especially under stress. Examination of surviving documents shows that some of the most dramatic details of the Mary Celeste story were added later and aren't in contemporary accounts. The warm meal detail, for instance, doesn't appear in the earliest testimony. This tells us we need to be careful about what we accept as fact versus legend. The statistical perspective. From a statistical standpoint, maritime disasters without clear explanation happen more often than people realize. In the 19th century, hundreds of ships were lost at sea every year. Many disappeared without trace. Crews vanished. Mysteries accumulated. The Mary Celeste is famous not because it's unique, but because it was documented so thoroughly. Other ghost ships have been found before and since. Other crews have made inexplicable decisions to abandon seaworthy vessels. What makes the Mary Celeste notable is that we have detailed evidence and yet still can't definitively solve it. But from a purely statistical view, unexplained maritime losses are not as rare as we might think. The ocean is vast, dangerous, and less predictable than we like to believe. Scientific consensus. Among maritime historians and scientists who have studied the case, there's general consensus on a few points. The ship was abandoned deliberately, not by violence or sudden disaster. The crew believed they were in danger, whether or not they actually were. The most likely explanation involves either vapor concerns or a false reading about water intake, creating a perception of imminent danger. Once in the lifeboat, weather, currents, or distance prevented return to the ship. Everyone aboard the lifeboat died, probably within a day or two. This explanation requires no supernatural elements, no conspiracy, no rare phenomena. Just a mistake, bad luck with conditions, and the unforgiving nature of the Atlantic. It's not a satisfying answer because it's not definitive, but it's the answer that best fits both the evidence and our understanding of maritime conditions and human behavior. Deeper meaning. Beyond the historical facts and scientific theories. What does the Mary Celeste tell us about the human condition and our relationship with the unknown? The illusion of control. The Mary Celeste represents a fundamental truth. We're not as in control as we think we are. Captain Benjamin Briggs was an expert. He'd sailed for decades. He owned part of the ship. He'd brought his family because he was confident in his ability to protect them. He had every reason to believe he could handle whatever the Atlantic threw at him. And yet, he made a decision that killed everyone under his care. Point. This isn't a failure of competence. It's a recognition that expertise has limits. Knowledge has limits. Control is often an illusion we maintain until circumstances prove otherwise. We like to believe that if we're smart enough, careful enough, experienced enough, we can prevent disaster. The Mary Celeste suggests that sometimes disaster comes not from lack of preparation, but from the fundamental unpredictability of existence. Briggs did his job correctly up until the moment he didn't. And that moment, whatever it was, cost him everything. The dangers of reasonable decisions. What's most unsettling about the Mary Celeste is that the crew probably made what seemed like reasonable decisions based on the information they had. If you smell alcohol vapor in an enclosed hold, moving away from potential explosion is reasonable. If you believe your ship is taking on water faster than you can pump, evacuation might seem reasonable. If you see a water spout approaching or feel a seaquake, seeking safety away from the ship could seem reasonable. But reasonable decisions can kill you if you're working from false information. This is a deeply uncomfortable truth. We can't always trust our assessments of danger. Our senses can mislead us. Our judgment can fail us. And by the time we realize our mistake, it may be too late to correct it. The Mary Celeste crew didn't die because they were reckless or stupid. They died because they made a reasonable decision based on incomplete or misinterpreted information. That's terrifying because it means it could happen to any of us. The weight of responsibility. Benjamin Briggs wasn't just responsible for himself. He had his wife, his daughter, and 7 crew members depending on his judgment. The weight of that responsibility is crushing to contemplate. In whatever moment the decision was made to abandon ship, Briggs was choosing not just his own fate, but the fate of everyone aboard. The men trusted his judgment. His wife trusted his judgment. His daughter had no choice but to trust him, and he was wrong. This speaks to the terrible burden of leadership. Leaders make decisions with incomplete information under time pressure. Sometimes those decisions are catastrophically wrong. And unlike mistakes made alone, leadership mistakes take others down with you. We can imagine Briggs in that lifeboat, perhaps in the hours before death, realizing he'd made a fatal error. Knowing he'd doomed his wife, his child, his crew, living with that knowledge in his final moments. That psychological weight is almost unbearable to contemplate. But it's a reality of command, of parenthood, of any position where others depend on your judgment. The sea as metaphor. The ocean has always represented the unknown in human mythology and psychology. It's vast, deep, dangerous, and fundamentally alien to us as land creatures. The Mary Celeste floating alone across the Atlantic is a perfect metaphor for human existence. We're all aboard a vessel crossing an uncertain sea. We don't know what hazards lie ahead. We can't control the weather or the currents. All we can do is navigate as best we can with the tools we have. Sometimes the ship carries us safely to port. Sometimes it doesn't. The Mary Celeste reminds us that the voyage is never guaranteed. The sea doesn't care about our plans, or our expertise, or our confidence. It operates by its own rules, and those rules are indifferent to human welfare. This is a truth we often avoid confronting. We surround ourselves with civilization, with technology, with systems and procedures designed to protect us from chaos. But the chaos is always there, just beyond the walls, waiting for the moment when our defenses fail. The stories we tell. The Mary Celeste has been the subject of countless retellings, each adding layers of interpretation and meaning beyond the bare facts. This tells us something important about human nature. We need stories more than we need facts. The documented evidence of the Mary Celeste is interesting to historians, but it's the story, the mystery, the emotional resonance that keeps the case alive in popular consciousness. We've turned a maritime tragedy into a legend. We've transformed the deaths of 10 people into a cultural touchstone. Is this disrespectful to the victims? Or is it a way of honoring them, ensuring they're not forgotten? Perhaps both. Perhaps the act of storytelling is how humans process tragedy and extract meaning from loss. The Briggs family would have vanished into history, like millions of other 19th century people. Instead, their story continues to be told 150 years later. The comfort of mystery. Paradoxically, there's something almost comforting about the fact that the Mary Celeste remains unsolved. In a world where we can track people via GPS, where surveillance cameras watch public spaces, where data analysis can predict behavior, where science seems capable of explaining everything, the existence of genuine mystery is reassuring. It tells us the universe is still larger than our ability to comprehend it. There are still unknowns. There are still questions without answers. The world hasn't been completely mapped and cataloged and explained. For some people, this is terrifying. For others, it's liberating. It means there's still room for wonder, for speculation, for imagination. The Mary Celeste stands as proof that not everything can be known. Not everything can be solved. Some mysteries endure Not because we're not smart enough to solve them, but because the evidence simply doesn't exist to provide certainty. And maybe that's okay. Maybe we need mysteries. Maybe they serve a purpose by reminding us that reality is bigger and stranger than our theories about it. The human cost. It's easy to get caught up in theories and speculation and analysis, but we should never forget that the Mary Celeste mystery represents 10 real deaths. Benjamin Briggs was 37 years old. He had dreams, fears, hopes for the future. He loved his wife and children. He had a mother who waited years for word of what happened to him. Sarah Briggs was 30. She was educated, intelligent, capable. She chose to sail with her husband, to raise her daughter at sea, to embrace a life that was unusual for women of her era. She trusted her husband's judgment. That trust cost her life. Sophia was 2 years old. She hadn't lived long enough to understand what life was, let alone what death meant. She was carried into that lifeboat and died without comprehending why. The 7 crew members had families. They had lives and stories and people who loved them. They went to sea to earn wages, to support themselves and their dependents. They trusted their captain to bring them home. He didn't. These aren't abstract figures in a historical mystery. They were people, and they died badly, probably of exposure or drowning, probably frightened and suffering, probably knowing they'd made a terrible mistake, but unable to fix it. The mystery is fascinating. But the human tragedy is what should stay with us. 10 people died because of a series of decisions and circumstances that we may never fully understand. That's the real story of the Mary Celeste. What it reveals about us, our fascination with the Mary Celeste, reveals something about human psychology and our relationship with the unknown. We're drawn to mysteries that should be solvable, but aren't. We return to them again and again, each generation offering new theories, new interpretations. We can't let them go. This isn't just curiosity. It's something deeper. It's a need to impose order on chaos, to find patterns in randomness, to make sense of senselessness. The Mary Celeste resists our attempts to explain it completely, and so we keep trying. We keep analyzing. We keep theorizing. Because to stop trying would be to admit defeat, to accept that some things are unknowable, and humans don't accept that easily. We're meaning-making creatures in a universe that may not contain inherent meaning. We tell stories to create the meaning that reality doesn't provide. The Mary Celeste is one of those stories, a mystery we've turned into a myth, a tragedy we've transformed into a legend, a historical event that's become a mirror, showing us our own need to understand to explain, to know. So what happened aboard the Mary Celeste on November 25th, 1872, or in the days immediately following? We've examined the evidence. We've explored the theories. We've looked at what science and history can tell us. And the most likely answer is this. Captain Benjamin Briggs perceived a threat to his ship, probably related to the alcohol cargo, or a false indication of dangerous water intake. He made the decision to evacuate temporarily, taking his family and crew into the ship's yawl, intending to return once the situation was assessed. Something went wrong with that plan. The lifeboat separated from the ship or couldn't return for some reason. Everyone aboard the small boat died within a day or two, probably from exposure or drowning. The Mary Celeste sailed on alone until discovered by the Dei Gratia 9 days later. It's not a dramatic answer. There's no conspiracy, no supernatural force, no rare phenomenon. Just a reasonable decision based on imperfect information, followed by bad luck and the unforgiving nature of the Atlantic Ocean. But that answer, even if it's the most probable, isn't certain. We'll never know with absolute confidence what happened in those final hours. The sea took 10 lives and gave back only questions. The Mary Celeste still exists, sort of. Her timbers lie scattered on a reef off Haiti, where she was deliberately wrecked in 1885. You can dive there if you want. You can touch the wood that once carried Benjamin, Sarah, and Sophia Briggs across the Atlantic. But the ship can't tell you what happened. The ocean keeps its secrets. Before I let you go, I want to pose a question, and I genuinely want your thoughts in the comments. If you had been in Captain Briggs's position, with your wife and young daughter aboard, faced with what seemed like an immediate threat to the ship, would you have made the same decision to evacuate? Or would you have trusted the ship and stayed aboard? How do you balance caution against risk when the lives of people you love depend on your judgment? Leave your thoughts below. And if you want more deep dives into maritime mysteries and the unexplained, subscribe to The Obscure Hour. We explore the strange, the mysterious, and the unsolved with a commitment to facts, critical thinking, and honest acknowledgement that some questions may never have definitive answers. Thanks for watching. Do well to like and subscribe to this channel, because this has been The Obscure Hour. And remember, sometimes the greatest danger isn't the storm you're facing. It's the safety you abandon when you run from it.